a laundry heap, a pocket knife, a battery. These are the things in my Jeep. These are the things in my Jeep.
I didn't really relate to that song because, I had different things in my Jeep than he had in his Jeep.
Oh, I got you good just now. I got you good. You should see your face. This is a little bit more nuanced than this. Unfortunately, we have to deal. But you were running scared for a second. I got you good for a minute. First off, I want to apologize for being the 794th PRIMOS video being recommended to you. I know we're technically quite late to this topic. Instead of vaguely dancing around the issues or throwing around anti-Semitic memes, I wanted to see if we could maybe strike some kind of balance. I want to honestly dissect and give context to some of the stuff we saw, while also being able to render a reasonable response. Having consciously waited until after the cartoon came out like we used to do in the old days, we will also be reviewing it as a show. I didn't have definitive plans to put this out. It's definitely been an option rolling around my small-ass skull since this whole controversy popped off. Truthfully, it is very intimidating to step onto the soapbox and talk about issues that everybody else would say that you're not equipped to handle. And while I do agree with the ethos of that rhetoric, this seems like a very real and clear case of something going wrong, and the vast majority of people are just not acknowledging what happened. At this point, the cartoon has been out for about 2 months, and it has generated its own small group of fans, but if you look around a bit, it seems like there are still people trying to shift the narrative over, as if to say, oh yeah, I mean, if they'd just done this, or we could have avoided all these silly billies. They just needed to do something. No, absolutely not. That is 110% untrue, factually incorrect. There was something much bigger going on here, and my final straw is trying to shift the blame, retroactively change everything that's going on. Everybody is entitled to have a stand. Everybody is fully within their right to stand 10 toes down and say what they mean, to mean what they say. But to try and walk it back retroactively and make it seem as if things were different, it's not sporting, it's not right, it's not good praxis, and I'm not tolerant of it. As you probably already figured out from my previous videos, if you were already party to them, I'm black, which might be important to some people that were tuning into this video, but it definitely doesn't place me at the heart of the issue, like the creator of this show, her crew, a lot of the detractors and critics behind it, maybe even other certain bystanders there. There's some similarity of shared experience here, but I think this is more a matter of common sense. And I think just as a person sitting back and witnessing everything that happened, it was pretty confusing, disappointing, angry doesn't begin to cover it, and very worrying for the future of art. And at this point, since we are totally unwilling to let the actual history stand, I figured at this point that I just kind of had to get over myself and release this as is. Like I said, I'm not Latin in any way, shape, or form. Entirely possible that I will get some shit wrong. I'm pretty sure my dumb ass was misusing the word diaspora in the Wish video I made a few months ago. Don't know how that happened, to be honest with you. Whether I do or not, criticism is totally fine. But the comment section is not going to become a microcosm of Twitter that whole week. That's not happening. All we're trying to do here is build up a more holistic view of everything that had happened. And again, differing opinions will reign. But I do hope to strike at least a few more commonalities that we should all be able to agree on by the end of this video. PRIMOS was first announced as a greenlit development project in November of 2021. As per the original press release, the story is based on Client's childhood experiences with her extended multicultural Mexican-American family. PRIMOS is set in childhood summers spent with my cousins under one roof, and the comedy that's born from that wonderfully hectic setting, Client said. As a kid, I didn't see myself or my culture represented on screen, so I'm excited to share my family dynamic through these new Disney characters and stories. Put that last quote on the leaderboard for a second. We're gonna come back to this. By November of the following year, the pilot for the animatic was leaked from an unknown source. Widespread knowledge of this pilot would not travel too far, but Natasha did acknowledge it within the same week of its unofficial release. I remember watching this and thinking, wow, this isn't very good. This is set up as if Tater is in the wrong, and she seems like a pretty reasonable person. She just wanted a birthday. And also, wow, the Casa Grandes comparisons are going to be terrible. I'm going to hate that. In between the leak and the official sneak peek, various other updates would ensue, little bits and bobs that would add to your understanding of how this world came to be. Klein got a feature from Animation Magazine and it lists some of her inspirations and the like, none of which caught me by surprise in hindsight. It's also important to note that based off of this information, she grew up from the late 80s to the early aughts in Los Angeles. On June 13th, 2023, in the midst of Annecy International Film Festival, Disney uploaded the original version of the PRIMOS theme song with the release theorized to be September of that year. As you could probably tell, it was a true and honorable shit show by all accounts. Within a day, a response was rendered by the voice actor of the main character, and that similarly did not go over very well. And quite honestly, if I can pop off for a second, it just seems like an incredibly selfish move. I do have a lot of empathy, knowing that this was probably a knee-jerk reaction, and that she was reacting from a very personal place of having her identity challenged. And let's not get it twisted. Y'all were saying a bunch of violent, nasty shit before she ever picked up the phone. This didn't come out of nowhere. But yeah, I mean, don't do this. For the love of God. Apparently industry people watch these videos. Take it from me, okay? I'm a concerned citizen. You do not come out and say some shit like this. We're not grading her on historical accuracy. We're not. It's just kind of crazy to say this. Don't do it. Please. Anyway, within the same week they uploaded the intro of the series, the video was taken down on all platforms. The show was never given an official premiere date until the eventual July premiere that we have just passed a couple months ago, but PRIMOS is considered delayed a total of 3 times. You have the original 2023 launch to January of 2024, from January to June, and then from June to July 25th. Aside from a Pixelotl panel in early September, that's about all we've heard of the show. At the current moment, the series has already burned through most of its 28 episode order, with us learning that the ordered 30 was cut down by 2 for unspecified reasons. Certain clips and songs re-uploaded have won back some crowds, and the series seems to be doing well on Disney+, but the wider reputation and current status of potential season 2 are both unknown. Okay, so that was a lot to unpack at once. The most bare-bones read that I could give at this current moment is that the feelings that fueled this reaction are extremely valid based off of where I think they're coming from, but based on the historical nature of a lot of that, it just seems very, very fucked up to pin all that on one show. There is no timeline where any or all of the details cherry-picked from the intro should have elicited such a powerful reaction. It very much seems like the cartoon was an easy outlet to pursue a lot of leftover funk, and while incredibly understandable, this is clearly a no-win scenario for everyone involved. It only ended up victimizing folks who didn't deserve it, and the systemic issues that were alluded to in the process weren't addressed in any productive manner. So I think the first thing that we should do here is try to unpack all the layers and complexity associated with it.
People don't always say what they mean, and things are not always what they seem. You better know before you make a scene that things are not always what they seem.
Creating an animated production is always a balancing act between commercial interest and personal vision. Despite speaking to more of a niche experience, the values and theming makes it possible to be shared with a wider share of people even if they don't have that particular experience. You could choose to blame Disney for not clarifying, and at this point I don't think I disagree with you. But the show itself, I think, made itself pretty clear. Personally, I'm galled by the idea that this could have been avoided had things been demystified, because it's just not true. The most pressing issue, though by no means the majority of the beef, stems from the assumption that PRIMOS was an insensitive attempt to portray an average Mexican family when it's actually portraying an extended Mexican-American family, focusing on the creator's self-insert, who in real life has the same background. There are only 12 PRIMOS that are picked out as main characters for the show, but Natasha had 23 cousins who informed how this series was built up. While the setting of the show wasn't officially disclosed until closer to the theme song's release, that initial press release explicitly contextualizes this as a Mexican-American family. Those who had access to the pilot could see that it left a lot more signifiers of the location than the final product. But details, like the Hollywood sign being left in the final product, were also decent indicators to those who were willing to look for them. Honestly, I just think there was a lot of willful ignorance fueling this discourse. It was easy enough to find these cursory details once the theme song was posted, and it's difficult for me to place blame at the feet of the creatives on board for not further spelling everything out. On the outside, the various details clocked in the clip were the justification for that criticism, and while it was simply left at that for plenty of detractors, others had additional motivations for attacking the cartoon. I mean, most of it was vibes-based, but the feelings themselves came from something very tangible. Among those critics, there was the common narrative that this was a clueless but somewhat calculated attempt to crib off of Mexican culture by way of nebulous heritage for the sake of people outside of that culture. Everything from the initial details from the clip to the creator's name and skin color were all scrutinized. It's a really cynical take that, while not entirely unwarranted based off of prior experience, wasn't justifiable in this context and only served to harm other marginalized folks. Plenty of those belonging to the Latin diaspora are in Tater's shoes in having that disconnect from their culture. In contrast, we also have to acknowledge that feeling that is often shared amongst non-diasporic individuals that often feel like lighter, brighter faces are prioritized in American television. The feeling that those of the mixed American experience are prioritized to some extent in television and film and the rest of entertainment is often the reality for them. You know, your experience is always being compartmentalized into another country, another experience or culture, or even just like symbols of such. There's a lot of static between those as part of the diaspora and those who aren't for historical reasons and cultural reasons. But other intersectional factors can also influence how these issues are communicated. One personal note I made early into this was the potential effects of colorism amplifying the rhetoric related to being Latin enough. Defined broadly as favoritism related to skin color within a racial or ethnic group, colorism has been a dominant factor that affects how POC communities grow and change. Broadly speaking, it establishes whiteness as the norm, and while it's commonly associated with the work of European colonizers, colorism has existed in certain forms long before their introduction into various indigenous populations. The proximity to whiteness still holds a decent amount of weight today, but in certain contexts it's more associated with otherness rather than authority. Today, the color can often be associated with isolation or a lack of anything, purity in its most extreme form. And this may also subconsciously manifest in how these concepts are treated within the context of outsiders. The image of a white person with a minimal amount of Latin lineage they're not historically reverent of, bumbling around trying to culturally identify with concepts they know very little about, is understandably quite triggering. It often feels appropriative and exploitative, as if Latinness is like a coat of makeup you could pop on and off. The assumptive backlash responding to this idea was projected onto a Mexican-American lady who primarily grew up in and around 90s Los Angeles. And that was a legitimate misstep for some. But it's likely that this was also a very deliberate choice for others.
My Spanish isn't great, but doesn't that mean cousins?
You're not alone, Tater. My Spanish isn't great either. But yeah, Primos means cousins.
One of the staff writers identified Natasha as Chicana, which, given the content of the series, probably should have been a no-brainer. Chicano culture is fundamentally built off the right to choose one's identity. Being Chicano can be physical, spiritual, cultural, political, all or none of those things. Los Angeles is a landmark location of the movement, but even if you grew up within it, you could still have no personal attachment or commitment to the culture of LA, which is its own thing. And in theory, even if there's no similarity in traditions or culture, that solidarity in difference is the deciding factor. Regardless of upbringing, there are plenty of folks that identify with the feeling of not fitting in, and it's incredibly ironic that was the dominant tone taken during the initial backlash. There's a significant chunk of people who are convinced that this show was made by committee at the hands of a bunch of crusty old white folks twiddling their thumbs at the round table trying to come up with the next Brown Girl cartoon. And I'm not saying that wasn't a reality at some point, but there's always been substantial evidence to challenge this claim in this context, and it was roundly ignored. To some extent, it's been said that protesting the show is a way of sticking it to Disney, which could be a genuine motivator, but that excuse is not flying either. Like, when Disney tried to trademark the Day of the Dead for the sake of protecting their legal rights to Coco, they got rightfully clowned on for trying to take some form of ownership over a very important holiday and indirectly other people's traditions. It was stupid, it was dangerous, regardless of their intentions for it, it shouldn't have happened. The criticism was aimed at the action of trademarking, in part because there wasn't really a face to Coco that was as prominent. But the problem was that they wanted to do that. They wanted to do a thing, right? Again, umbrage taken with the intro was based off of tangible things, but a lot of the discontent ran deeper into more abstract, absolutist ideas on who's entitled to do what. That, or they just thought the cartoon was lame, and that's, I mean, it's okay to be a hater every blue moon, as long as it doesn't evolve into this. There's also a slew of Disney media made for kids that could have been subjected to that criticism. Or if they haven't been scrutinized to a similar level here. I'm not in the business of trying to investigate anyone. It's not my place, it's not worth my time, it's not in the spirit of the show, and I'm not interested in it. But we do have to acknowledge the possibility that some of the folks that were speaking from a place of knowing better or actually being Latin are also of a different cultural and or historic makeup than they would say. Now, I don't think its potential presence would transmute all of the fair, more balanced takes into bad ones, but it is truly significant to everything we just talked about. It's more common today for intersectional elements to be accepted as part of Latin identity. I grew up around a fair amount of Latinos who would quickly rebuff any idea that they could be black or any idea therein that they're anything other for various reasons.
I know black. Imposible. I know black. I'm Dominican. I'm Puerto Rican. I know black. Be looking just like me. Be having the same hair. I be touching it like, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same, papi. It's not the same. They try to salsa that shit off. I be like, no, it's not the same. I know black. Negro nunca. I know no.
But also others that embrace their identities as Afro-Latins. Just like in real life, the PRIMOS are a diverse collection of shapes, sizes, and skin tones, which anecdotally seems rather rare within American media attempting to portray that part of the experience. Natasha herself could be considered white passing, which others are more next to her characters. Paired with the alleged lack of heritage, it all makes for a bit of a vacuum effect. Much of this could also apply to the details from the intro that were critiqued. I think there's two rebuttals technically that could apply to each point. One that's all-encompassing, the other one that's personalized. We just go round robin real quick. Surely this won't harm the runtime of the video. Being grammatically incorrect and regardless of fluency is culturally acceptable to use in the setting they established. As discovered in interviews conducted before the theme song was released, Tater is a Mexican-American kid disconnected from Mexican culture, and among other things that would mean that she doesn't speak good Spanish.
My main character, Tater, actually doesn't speak Spanish. That's why she says Oye Primos, because it's obviously wrong.
Coquita being an inappropriate name for a main character because one meaning for it could be inappropriate, even one in its anglicized form. The one that the character's name is in, has numerous meanings. Of course, since it could possibly carry this one meaning, it probably wouldn't normally pass the sniff test for a Disney cartoon. But one meaning doesn't supersede all the others. Words mean different things in different regions. It's kind of silly to insist that these people don't know what they're talking about or that their culture is fake just because they didn't compensate for it. This is a list of every other thing I discovered this name could also stand for. Mexico filter being stereotypical of Mexican culture when it does have broad use outside of those settings for any place that is hot in Western media. Terremoto Heights being an offensive name for a town because Mexico has a particularly traumatic history with earthquakes. As if Los Angeles also doesn't experience earthquakes. As if California doesn't exist on the same fucking fault line. Why is the show not Mexican enough to be able to pass the vibe test, but still Mexican enough to have to compensate for this issue? Make it make sense. The math ain't math in here. Offensive naming scheme of certain characters being made, I guess, because Americans love tacos? Yeah? We're going for this one? Nacho is a particularly common Mexican name. It's a diminutive of Ignacio, and the cartoon made it kind of clear. There was some foreshadowing that these two characters are similar or are closely connected. That's why they have similar names. In the cartoon itself, it was revealed that these two characters are brothers, and they're named after their dad, who, guess what? is named Ignacio. Stereotypical music for the cartoon. Now this one I think is a little more subjective. Have we heard this type of music a lot in American media? Yeah. Are there other genres for them to tap into? Of course. Have they done that with the cartoon? Well, I guess you'll find out later, won't you? The big family being stereotypical when it specifically mirrors the creator's personal lived experience, having been around 23 Primos growing up one summer. The sneakers on the power line, this one isn't brought up that much, but I think, again, because it's an attribute, presumably, of the creator's lived experience, I don't think it's really fair to judge this as a stereotypical aspect in and of itself. More importantly, now coming close, this one's pretty important. The show takes place in fucking Los Angeles! What are we doing? There were certain points where I found myself conceding that some of these would be better if they were made clear, but then I remembered that these accusations were built off of barely 40 seconds of footage and were painfully allergic to accepting secondary evidence that could challenge them, and at that point I just wanted to yeet myself into the sun and be done with this shit. Realistically speaking, certain alterations probably didn't change how the series' vision was expressed too much. There were even other changes that were made preemptively to avoid additional implications.
Imagine all of the things that I'll see, yeah. Now that I got an alien for a prima. Let's start 3, 2, 1 with my alien. Imagine all of the things that I'll see, yeah. With an extraterrestrial for a prima. Let's start 3, 2, 1. Cosmos, here we come.
At this point, it's even harder to miss that the show took place in the United States, which is good, but it's wild that this had to be done anyway. In a normal time, like back in my day, if it was presumed that certain details could be offensive to different populations, the dubbing teams would just end up changing those details for a specific audience. That wouldn't even be necessary here. It's fucking Los Angeles. Again, I think this is where the crux of all the issues were, and relatively speaking, this is still kind of a surface level examination of what went wrong. But I think at the very least, it does help demystify some things that other people weren't willing to address. But now that we got all that out of the way, why don't we actually look at the cartoon for a bit, huh? See if it surpasses any of those pesky preconceived notions you got there.
Looking for someone? Do you have 411? Please help me if you can. Stop my lonely waiting. Have you got 411?
The show itself is fine. Like, was that a shock to anyone? It follows in step with most children's animated series billed as following little kids on big adventures. It's soft and sweet and sappy like most Disney TV cartoons, and it lives and dies by the goals initially outlined in its press releases and interviews. It is not unlike many other animated series of the last 10-15 years, aside from this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day that colored how people treat it. For example, the art style does carry those curvy, wavy, soft, fugly elements in how it does characters. If you've seen the original pitch Bible, you may appreciate the final product a bit more. Though, as is, the main characters outside of maybe Tater and Nelly barely manage to stick out from a crowd. The background characters, the few that show up, look pretty mismatched. Some arguably don't blend well into this show. In their softer Disney-fied forms, these characters lend themselves better to the graphic arts more than anything. When storyboarded especially, I got the feeling they were plucked out of a storybook or something. Not a lot of wild takes or wacky deformations to be found, but the musical sequences do well to place them in other contexts. The color designers were absolutely carrying, and I think they deserve a promotion or 2 or 7. It's difficult to describe because, again, plenty of modern series have no issue getting more textured with its backgrounds and the like. We don't get to see much of LA, ironically, but the bits of it we do see feel very lived in. I think that the structure of the show, it functionally doesn't do anything new, but there's like little tweaks and alterations that make it more of an interesting watch. Tater definitely spends most of her time with like XYZ Primos for the day, but these stories are mainly centered around her. Even when a particular Primos has an issue that they're working through, It's just an avenue for Tater to figure herself out or work through this issue that she's been dealing with. I don't have a favorite Primo at this point. I think they feel a bit more fleshed out than maybe the Louds or something. Actually, the character that I think I've been most interested in up to this point is the Vision Tiger. He's an imaginary friend that Tater had picked up from a baby book that she was given, and his single-minded mission is to help her advance to her final form, as she would describe it. He's just there to help her figure out who she is. And he's not just like a gag character. Sometimes he's suffering. He's in the trenches right along with her if she's having like a major emotional crisis, and sometimes he's just off doing his own thing. Not a new idea by any stretch, but I think his execution is a bit more thoughtful than it normally would be. If I had to pick a character that I think is ignored, I think it would actually be Nellie, which is Tater's younger sister. She's whip smart, she's snarky, you know, she always got a little scheme going on, percolating in her head. And as of the episodes I've seen, she's usually in the background just doing some random bullshit, which I think situationally is appropriate given the real focus on Tater. At the same time, I'm kind of wondering what it would look like if she had more of a spotlight. Up to this point, I think she only has one spotlight episode. It's established in that one that she's very much of the mindset that Tater takes up too much space. She's prioritized by the Primos, and it unintentionally leaves her feeling left out. The catalyst for the episode itself is Tater running to the Primos complaining she needs money for something, and Nellie suggests a lemonade stand, and then Tater brushes her aside, doesn't even listen to her, and then 5 seconds later comes up with the exact same idea and gets applauded for it. So what Nellie decides to do is to open her own lemonade stand, just top down, do the full Tater cosplay, and sing about how much of a better Tater she is. Things come to a head when she tries to destroy her diary, and they have like a little heart-to-heart, because it's clear that Tater does love and care about her sister and notices things, and that Nellie needs a better outlet for her emotions than whatever that was. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. I think one of the 2 scrapped episodes is also Nellie focused, so that's unfortunate. The song that was revealed as part of it also seemed like it could have been pretty decent. But while we're talking about the songs, oh, you gonna hate me for this. You gonna hate me for this. The musical library of Primos, honestly, unmatched, raw, powerful. Pretty much solos, I would say 80 to 90% of the last decade of DTVA soundtracks. Unquestioningly, it has become a bit of a content strategy for Disney to release a single or like a small soundtrack along with the show coming out. And this is something that has only happened within the last 5 years or so. It's very obviously taken from another show that, you know, we don't gotta talk about today, but we will again soon enough. And it seems like this strategy was built off the backs of the unintentional spin-off series that they weren't paying attention to. But I think, quite honestly, the way that Primo stunted on all these hoes was powerful. Personally, I've been feeling like this particular format of releasing music or necessitating that music be in most episodes for these series, these modern series, is rather not detrimental, but it's certainly unnecessary. I can count on one paw how many times I would actively remember or go back to a certain collection of songs from a show. They just feel rather arbitrary, you know? They all blend in, all these shit sound the same. I see no reason why we're dropping a 90-second musical track for Kif when there are 12 unique words in the song and it doesn't change or anything. So trust me when I say that Primos understood the fucking assignment. Bravo to them. What's funny about it too is that the 2 songwriters responsible for most of them are Disney Channel jobbers. They've been in the game for over a decade. So it's not like a fresh new vision was required for this to be good. It's just, you know, the songs themselves have a purpose. They have a meaning and they have a drive. More commonly in musical theater, it was said that when emotions become too powerful for mere words, the words become songs. And when the emotions became too strong for songs, those songs became dances. Now, I don't think you need to follow that tack to make your songs work, to make them meaningful or anything. But outside of maybe the Disney Junior library, It's one of the few times that I felt like a Disney cartoon really tapped into that, and it felt really cool. It's funny because I think the music so far has been kind of hit or miss. Like the earlier ones, just not fucking with a lot of them. I can't put a pin specifically on which one changed the game, but I can say that the ones that I thought were weaker, I could go back to, they start to grow on me a little bit, still not really feeling them, but I think I have a better idea what they were going for. Twitter already hyped up that electro swing track, so I'm going to recommend 5 other songs I think would bang in no particular order.
I am feeling low, uncomfortably numb, lost inside a maze of oblivion. Something can't walk through fire, something can't make it through. Nothing gonna hold me back, no, I'ma do whatever I gotta do. I got the fire burning inside, something the air look colder than ice. Better believe as long as I breathe, I'd do anything to get to you too.
I am the star you never seen. Don't ever look behind the screen.
Always speak from your heartbeat everywhere you go. Don't go dimming your light, shine bright and let it show. I'll put you away, but I'm filled with regret. I can promise you this, I will never forget all the love we had.
I'm gonna give a shout out that song about Tater thinking Cha-Cha was an alien and coming to accept her for her weird ass self. It was really cool. Imagery didn't hit me as hard as Shame of Love, but I mean, what's she gonna do? There's certainly a few episodes that have emerged as viewer entry points, the easiest avenues through which to understand this world, its characters, and how it explores its theming. Most are rather obvious because PRIMOS wears its heart on its sleeve. The themes aren't particularly hard to grasp. If you run through all of these episodes, there's only 6 of them, then that's a little over an hour. So you can understand the ethos, the real essence of Disney's PRIMOS just by watching these 6. You got Summer of Quadros, which is about the smart primo Gordita learning about art and the nature of how it dovetails off of emotion and meaning and memory. You got the Summer of No Sabo, this one's gonna be a favorite, right? It's just about how bad, how Tater doesn't know how to culture, and how difficult it is for her to learn Spanish. We got the Summer of Herramientas, which is about Tater and Nelly's father kind of unpacking how difficult it is for him to connect with his kids on a deeper level. We got the Summer of Tater Luna, which is about Tater designing a Sailor Moon XP and everyone coming in and making changes and shit. This gentleman already made a pretty solid look at this episode in particular, so you can watch that. Summer of El Cringe. Tater likes this Animorphs ripoff, and some older kids in the library called her fave trash, and she struggles with that. Genuinely, it's very funny how it's all coming together. And the Summer of the Santa Anas. There's a huge hurricane that rolls through. Everyone is stuck inside. Tater has left her diary out. She doesn't know where that is, and she's having trouble coping. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The structure and premise of the show is nothing new, but the little personalization sprinkled throughout makes it easy to see its perspective, and I'd presume easier for kids to latch onto. The cultural elements help make up the backdrop of the show, but their implementation in the narrative feels a bit more subtle. Even if identity is a central part to the story, it does feel different. I was entertained enough for the trouble. It's nothing extraordinary for us as grown-ass adults, but that's mainly because we've seen the gags and the tropes before. Most people outside of the target demographic already have their own PRIMOS. I reckon it has a better shot at connecting with its audience than most other shows of its ilk. Everyone has a different take on how rep should be handled. Even if they don't call it representation, they have a personal expectation of how various identities should be portrayed. People thought we solved racism in 2005 because TV cartoons happen to have a few more non-white protagonists than expected. Juniper Lee was kicking ass in the mid-aughts, while Dragon Tales was low-key fumbling the bag under everyone's noses. You remember that shit? Even looking at different PBS series from the modern day, they all stem from different degrees of that experience. The attribute that tends to carry them is that feeling, and that's a feeling that's integral to Primos' identity as a piece of art and a product of Disney. I humbly anticipate your 9-hour Primos dissertations in the future that were probably made to pad time, but also made with a lot of love. Hopefully. I don't know.
You're part of the problem if you're not helping solve them. Stand up and show them what you got. Be part of the solution. No reason for losing. Just be sure you're not part of the problem. Part of the problem.
Like I said at the top, this is personal for me. I'm not Latin, and there's limited cultural DNA that I would have as a qualifier just based off of where I grew up and the circumstances behind that. But a lot of us do disseminate quite a few of the same issues from culture to culture. The only problem here is that it took the work of one group to sour this thing for everyone, and it's a pattern that we should really get into the habit of quelling, because it's genuinely quite harmful. I know this because I saw a bunch of grown folk that look like me and ideologically and have a lot in common with normally absolutely torpedo a cartoon just like Primos. It was minding its own business, blessed and unbothered, just trying to do its own thing, and could have been a future juggernaut. Many of you have probably heard of the Oscar-winning animated short Hair Love, a heartwarming short that touches on the nuances of black hair that few have cracked for a mainstream audience. Several months after its award win, it was announced that HBO Max had commissioned a TV series following the family's adventures called Young Love. Towards the end of summer, Nickelodeon announced that it's bringing forth a cartoon about a young black fashionista called Made by Maddie. The complaints came with a swiftness not often seen this side of entertainment. It's kind of wild that a few characters that kind of look similar, because I guess they have the same hairstyle, was enough to justify the vast swath of complaints. Understandably, Hair Love got a lot of praise and admiration and respect for talking about issues not often seen, but that doesn't mean it's entitled to its own information monopoly. Plenty of animation professionals joined in on the mob, with a surprising appearance from the creator of Hair Love himself. And what these industry folks were miraculously sidestepping is the fact that they damn well know that this concept could have been conceived earlier than the Max greenlight, or even earlier than Hair Love was first introduced to the world. Similar to Primos, there was very little pushback challenging this behavior, and within less than a week, Nickelodeon had pulled the series from its prospective September 13th air date, and the producing studio rendered a defense. Fascinating how the show stops being an original series and starts becoming a show we acquired after the shit hits the fan. Funny that, as stupid as it may sound, this situation was a radicalizing moment for me. Nobody came to this show's defense, and largely nobody has spoken about it since. Forgotten to the sands of time in the name of what would eventually be revealed as a lukewarm Proud Family XP. Fucking hell. I don't think anyone was operating under the assumption that Made by Maddie could have revolutionized black entertainment or something. It was made by a middle-aged white lady with very few black folks in top creative positions. But this was unquestionably a loss. Even assuming that it had a deficit of black voices calling the shots, this backlash objectively took away at the time current and future jobs from POC creatives. These things are always somebody's first project, and having that TV credit from a tangible production makes a world of difference in the job market. Preschool entertainment is practically guaranteed to carry on longer than the average 6 to 11 comedy, and it's been like that for a while. It probably would have had enough time to make changes for a follow-up order if they were allowed to stick around. Kids entertainment should probably be the first place you can look to for well-rounded, positive representation across the sector. We often find ourselves making astonishingly bad choices for it. A lot of black creative-led projects are subject to this treatment, actually. Despite the appearance of exclusivity, I think it's still important to call attention to shit like this, even if you're not culturally looped into the proceedings. Listen to different perspectives, share additional experiences, actually discuss something for once. I've seen people violate across every color, creed, gender that exists. Proud Family discourse alone seems to have united the citizens of Earth in delivering absolutely nuclear takes on this relatively simple cartoon. The primary injustice of this is cloaked around the sense that nobody is equipped to talk about it, when in reality, with a few more critical thinking skills than the average Twitter user, this situation automatically gets demystified to an exponential degree. Everyone gets it wrong at some point. I'm not denying that. The nuances involved in these discussions and the rationale why such gatekeeping exists is very heavy, way deeper than any one person could dissect at any time. And that's fine. But at a certain point, you just kind of have to call it for what it is. These situations were fucking ridiculous. The reason why it's so important to let people tell their own stories is that nobody can tap into their lived experience better than they can. But at the end of the day, they're one person. They have one experience, and that naturally intersects with many others, but it cannot compensate for a singular experience across an entire group. The same way Primos can't possibly represent all Mexican Americans, its detractors cannot ascribe one specific vision for all Latin media, for all Latin people. It's certainly reasonable for there to be jealousy among Latin folks for being misrepresented, or undercounted, or not heard. They don't want that, and I don't want that for them either. If only one experience can be seen or heard, that is not representation, and we need to do better. But if one group wins, everyone does, eventually. We're all in a fucking existential struggle against 9,001 other factors, and infighting is just gonna exist naturally. But dealing with stuff like this makes us less equipped to deal with the real issues. I'm not preaching blanket unity, but is it okay if we just let things exist? Please? Please? Can we do that? Nobody will ever convince me that attacking this random Disney cartoon was one small part of winning the struggle. Come the fuck on. I know whoever disagrees with Primos on a fundamental level does not give a shit. I didn't really make this video for y'all, but I'm telling you right now, this is only gonna serve to hurt you in the long run. The people that are actually in charge don't give a single blue fuck about how masterfully that shot was handled in your favorite piece of Mexican media. You and me look exactly the same to them. We all fit under this nebulous branch of ethnic content. We are automatically secondary. We are cast aside, and they are to determine who gets picked to have the privilege of being able to tell a story unfettered. Your outrage was certainly heard, but it's almost guaranteed that they're going to take the wrong lesson from it. We are not getting more mucha luchas because of this. We're getting less of everything. In an environment where getting original content on the air is already worse than pulling teeth. That's a bad thing. That's really bad. There's a big difference between not accepting slop and throwing everything and anything out that doesn't suit your needs. And trust and believe we're gonna get to these motherfuckers at some point. We're not letting them off either. But you, right now, in this current moment, are cutting off your nose despite your face, and you don't even care. I promise you, you're not gonna like the end result 10 and 20 years down the line if you even recognize it. If one of us loses out, we all lose out, whether you like them or not. Simple as that.
We have to learn to fight, learn to overcome. Resist with all our might, learn to overcome. And we can make things right if we learn to overcome. Na 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 na, na 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 na.
So, I don't think this story has the happiest conclusion. What do y'all think? For a while, I had a very hard time just attempting to start watching the show with the knowledge of how everything went. I mean, the industry's been a hot mess for a while. I don't really look forward to things, maybe like 2 or 3 individual projects, but I don't think I've ever found myself too sad to watch some shit before. Ain't that something? Like, what the fuck we even talking about at this point? There's a lot of things I don't like about how this has been handled by Disney or its detractors, but for as big as the reaction was, the worst crime is always going to be the obfuscation of its target audience. I've been thinking about this for a long time, but it's inconceivable how little the generations after us benefit from having their own worlds and characters to themselves. Part of that is due to the fact that there's far fewer of them. You know, even before the pandemic, I'd argue that the next generation didn't get the same degree of stupid, well-animated, self-indulgent, goofy goober shit that we did. Tonally, Primos is not on par with the cartoons of yore. Again, it's as Disney as a cartoon can get, which can be a blessing in disguise in the long term. The way I see it, this has the chance to be Disney's Craig of the Creek, an energetic, diverse, and inclusive place for kids to learn, laugh, and look inward. It didn't lose its worth entirely because its edges have been sanded down, but the 3% they shaved off the top could be the difference between a half-hearted slog between one segment and a lifelong fan who saw hundreds of shades of gray between the cast. It is not easy making cartoons. Nobody said it was like being a surgeon or a pilot, but that shit is tough. It's tough to navigate this system for years and decades just to make it to the top percentile who sold the show and had it premiere, only to have all of this shit happen. She did everything right and she still got clapped up for it. The spirit of this show is about making a few more kids feel seen. The average kid could probably see a Latin Tater even if they don't strictly identify with her struggles. It's funny because that electro swing track is seeing a fuck ton of covers made for it, the vast majority being in Latin American Spanish. Now keep in mind, unlike most cartoons where typically they're among the first to drop, those dubs aren't even out yet for this show. Don't know why, I mean, surely it's not related to this. These people went out of their way to pull up that studio instrumental, to translate the original lyrics, to sing all that, and then add additional effects and features. All in the name of a show that was said to be an abomination to this part of the world. That is fascinating to me. Look, this was a round failure to interject, to elucidate, to engage in media literacy. There were various smaller opportunities for folks to speak up that were squarely ignored. Y'all are way too comfortable letting this get passed around as if it's a clear and damning indictment of the people who made this. You know, Swampy Erasure is fucked up, okay? I'll be the first one to say it. But this man should absolutely be recognizable to y'all. I know that cartoon is popular over there. Don't give me that shit. They knew what they was doing, and nobody called them out on it. Here's a little pro tip for you. If at any point in this you found yourself saying, well, you know, I'm white, or, you know, like not Latino, so I can't weigh in on the specifics of these criticisms. Hope they make some changes, though. That's not neutrality. What are you doing? That is the shittiest attempt to toe the line that you could put up. And you leaving your stance to be weaponized by bad actors. You are not complicit, you are part of the problem. That's the exact type of response that is worthy of reflection here. We are all responsible for this shit, and we have to clean it up. I wouldn't say this is anything new, but the fact that 4chan is giving the cartoon more grace than a lot of y'all should be a wake-up call. All of us, but especially those of us engaged in curating and producing media, have a greater social responsibility than is often appreciated. It's damn sure not easy, and it's often quite thankless, but if we don't make a greater effort to keep these pathways open, they will certainly be lost in translation and eventually lost to time. Within the current landscape, these things that take years, maybe even decades to incubate, are barely given 2 seconds to breathe once they're out. It's a miracle that the financial investment placed in creating PRIMOS was considered more worthwhile than the money saved from avoiding more backlash. It's so frustrating hearing people talk about PRIMOS as if it was improved, as if to say that the surface level nitpicks were all that was holding it back this whole time. This show was always poised to reach people. It's about love, community, and perseverance. We owe it to these shows to follow the example set. Letting these themes and ideas fall by the wayside at the hands of ill-composed tweets is a creatively conceived injustice, but not one that will be or should be easily forgotten.